So just 8 days now until the 2018 Grand National, but we're not going to look forward this morning. We're going to look back, and Phil Turner, our Grand National expert
and old fart
guru, other complimentary words, has put together his list of his top 5 renewals.
I mean, they are. I won't say top 5. They're favourites for sort of all types of reasons. I thought they're all interesting renewals, and I just thought, and they're each from sort of different parts of my lifespan. So
yeah, it's worth stressing here that this isn't like a Timeform definitive top 5 or ratings. This is your personal, because they resonate with you throughout.
Yeah, that's right. Although, funny enough, a fair few of them actually are like significant ratings performance. But as I say, no, it's sort of a. Well, let's go through them anyway.
Yeah. Well, it's the most colourful race that there is, and there's so many different renewals. And your number 5 is the 2001 renewal, which really was quite remarkable.
Yeah, it was. I mean, to be honest, you used the word colourful there, and I think that's kind of the reason this is in, because the sort of racing purist in me doesn't sort of necessarily enjoy a race like that. But you have to sort of look at the Grand National as the bigger picture. I mean, it sometimes annoys me when people describe it as a lottery. And I'm like, yes, there are hard luck stories in it, but basically it normally isn't a lottery. It's sort of like the winner is normally one of the best handicapped horses, and you know, they could have been found. However, having said that, there have been one or two complete fluke winners, Foynaven being the best known of them all in 1967, and that's just a bit before I was born. But so I guess my version of Foynaven would be this, where, you know, Red Marauder, although he was a good horse, he was a decent performer on park courses, he would not have won a Grand National but for the strange events of 2001. He simply wasn't a good enough jumper. And in fair play to Richard Guest, his jockey, I mean, when he realised there was just 2 left, he didn't care what it looked like. He was just going to make sure it got round. And even with just one of the horses to jump against, he was still jumping awfully. But he got him round, and he won. And it's just really, I was there that day. It was a hideous day. I mean, the backdrop to it was the year of the foot and mouth outbreak, and we'd lost Cheltenham. And it's the worst ground I've ever seen, Aintree. And to be honest, I don't think they should have been racing. I think it was unraceable, but I guess the industry couldn't really suffer no Cheltenham Festival and an abandoned Grand National. And I think they, funny enough, probably got lucky in the end that it was such a bizarre race, because one of the horses I backed, Paddy's Return, he unseated at the second. He was wearing headgear. He got to the first canal turn and decided he wasn't going to jump it, and he just veered right across in front of most of the field, wiped out.
I like Clan Royal, sort of.
Well, far more so than that, because this one he wiped out sort of most of the field, and then by the time he got onto sort of the final circuit, Loose Horses wiped out another more at the big ditch, and then Beau and Carl Llewellyn, who'd lost his reins in an earlier incident, he went, I think, at the 20th, and there were 2 left, and it was like, at the course, it was like, what on earth is happening here? Yeah, this is the Grand National. Now, 2 others did actually, Blowing Wind and Pappy on the previous year's winners, they did remount and finish in their own time behind, so there were technically 4 finishes, but there were only 2 finishers who jumped around without incident. That's the first time it happened since 1928, and the historians amongst us, there was another pile-up at the first canal turn in that year's race. The best chaser of that era was a horse called Easter Hero, and he'd been leading, refused at the canal turn. It was an open ditch in those days, and he got in the ditch and ran across the ditch and wiped out all those behind, and there were only 2 finishes in that race, and 100 to 1 horse won it that year. So it was chaos, it was history repeating itself. In 1928, what they did, they filled in the ditch for the next year's renewals to try and prevent that ever happening again. And as a result of the Red Marauder incidents, they finally gave us runoff areas, so hopefully Loose Horses, if they got to that fence and decided they didn't want to jump it, they could just go around it. So touch wood, we hope we won't see anything like that again. But as I say, it just adds to the history of the race. You know, you've got the bomb scare, the void race. It all just sort of adds to it. And to the once-a-year punters, they probably lap that up, whereas the purists amongst us thought, what on earth's going on here? So I just thought it was worth including for that reason.
And for your number 4, we go a bit further back to 1998 and 88, sorry, and Rhyme and Reason.
Rhyme and Reason, yeah. I mean, there were plenty of thrills and spills in this race as well, but it was a bit more conventional. I guess the thing with Rhyme and Reason, you could technically ask which Grand National winner fell and still won, and it would be him, because at first Beaches, he effectively fell. He sort of did the splits on landing, was sliding on his belly, and Brendan Powell did very well to sort of maintain the partnership, but he was stone last as a result of that, jumping the next fence. He was being held up anyway, and he sort of just nursed his way back into it. And funny enough, actually probably found himself in front too soon, because there were a few horses who were going well in front who went. Strands of Gold for Peter Scudamore fell at second Beaches when he was going very well. And then Little Polver and seated 5 out in spectacular fashion. And left Rhyme and Reason in front. Little Polver actually came out the next year to win it at a big price. It looked like he was beat 2 out when Durham Edition and Chris Grant overtook him. Poor old Chris Grant, he was runner-up in the National 3 times, and this was probably the one he looked most like winning. But he had been dossing Rhyme and Reason, and he came back very bravely on the run to overhaul him. And he definitely would classify as an above-average national winner. On his previous starts, he was running in the Gold Cup. He, in many ways, he sort of fits the profile of sort of many national winners. He'd been a good horse in his younger years. He'd been runner-up in what's now the RSA chase, and he won the Irish National as a novice. And then he kind of lost his way for a couple of years. He switched stables, he went to David Ellsworth, and he just gradually went back on the upgrade. And he'd been second in the Welsh National earlier that year, a very good performance. Won the race in post-chase, and he fell 4 out, almost a carbon copy fall of his one at Beaches, where he got on his belly, but it was one of the downhill fences 4 out at Cheltenham, and he'd fallen. But for that, he would have finished a clear 3rd in the Gold Cup. And anyone who fancies Total Recall this time around, it's kind of a similar incident. He would have probably finished 3rd or 4th at Cheltenham. And you're dealing with a similar type of horse, and as I say, he was an above-average national winner, and a very, very brave performance in the race, because I think he did actually sort of injure himself in that piece, and he never ran again. They retired him, so he was a good winner.
Okay, number 3, a winner who very nearly, a runner-up who very nearly created history in this race. Yeah,
I guess the 1991, it is sort of all about the runner-up, and that's a bit harsh on Little Seagram, because he was a lovely horse, Seagram. He was a New Zealand bred, really, really consistent handicapper, and showed sort of all his attributes. I don't think he was enjoying it early on at National. I think he found the National Fences a bit of a culture shock, but he was such a sort of likeable horse. He sort of warmed up to it, and showed all his battling qualities to sort of win on the long running. And rather like the Rhyme and Reason renewal, it's the Aintree running playing tricks again. It's sort of, there's so many nationals down the year when a horse has looked all over the winner, and I guess the most sort of famous of those would be Crisp. And the Crisp connection here comes with the Pittman family, because Crisp was ridden by Richard Pittman. His wife at the time was Jenny Pittman, and their eldest son is Mark Pittman, and they're the sort of names behind the runner-up in 1991, which was Garrison Savannah. Jenny Pittman trained it, Mark Pittman rode it, and he'd won the Cheltenham Gold Cup that year, and he was bidding to become the first since Golden Miller in 1934 to win both races in the same year. Lascargo's the only other horse who's won both races, so it really would have been a notable feat. And I mean, funny enough, when I was writing this piece, went round to watch the race again, I still don't really know how he didn't win it, because he jumped superbly, was travelling best, virtually throughout. And as I say, if there'd been Betfair in running in those days, he'd have been trading at the shortest price possible probably, when he sort of sauntered clear, looked all over the winner at the last, and only sort of gets to the elbow, he sort of faltered a bit, and Seagram came and did him, and he was beaten 5 lengths in the end. And I guess whenever that happens, you probably would point the finger and say, well, perhaps he did sort of kick for home slightly too soon. But I think most jockeys watching that wouldn't have thought that at the time. In fact, I think most jockeys would probably kicked even earlier. That's how well he was going. So it was just unfortunate, whether it was sort of he did a hard race at Cheltenham or whatever made the empty on the running, I don't know. But as I say, it was nearly a piece of history, and as I say, the parallels with Crisp and it happening to Mark Pittman all those years later was very painful, and they took it in very good grace.
Now, your number 3 renewal is remembered perhaps for the runner-up, and the number 2 renewal of yours is perhaps remembered more for the jockey than it is the winner.
Yeah, it is, and that's a good point to make. Don't Push It. It's obviously the Tony McCoy story, which should just sort of centre on Don't Push It, because it would be one of the best post-war winning performances in the Grand National. He was a good horse, rather like I said with Rhyme and Reason earlier. He'd been a really good horse in his novice days. He'd pushed Denman very close at Cheltenham in a novice chase, and had every chance in the outcome, and he fell at the second last. And then for one reason or other, he sort of stood still a little bit for the next few years. And what sometimes happens, they get to a race like the National, it's a bit of a different test, and it just, perhaps the fact they're just not going a flat out Grade 1 pace, and they just find it easier, and he took to it really well, and he was a very, very good winner, because it was a part of the reason I put it in is not so much, I mean, obviously the McCoy story was fantastic, and that's what sort of resonated, and it sort of it really resonated with the non-racing public as well, because he was, you know, such a great champion. And I mean, the parallels go on with Sir Gordon Richards on the flat. He was the record-breaking champion jockey on the flat, you know, 60, 70 years ago, but he'd never won the Derby until I think it was his final year riding, and that was a massive deal, him finally winning the Derby. And it was a bit of a similar deal with McCoy. He won Sports Personality on the back of it, didn't he? But the race itself, I just thought it was a really exciting renewal. They went a stronger gallop than they sometimes do nowadays. Black Appalachie, sadly the thing I backed, was a great sight over these fences, and he really turned it on from a long way out. And it just thought it was like a real old-fashioned, exciting race to watch. And as I say, it took a very good performance to win it. And yeah, as I say, it just ticks a lot of boxes, and I just thought it deserved to be included.
And for your number one, now some people might be able to guess the horse, but there's 3 renewals to choose from with this one.
Well, I said in the piece, there's 5 renewals to choose from, because Red Rum ran in 5, and in many ways it was a bit of a vintage era, because although there are probably en masse a higher quantity of quality horses running nowadays, in the sense that they're all in the handicap proper, you know, you go back 40 years ago and probably half the field will be racing out the weights, but there are fewer sort of real top shelf sort of performers running the race nowadays. It's deemed a bit too risky, but for a brief period in the 70s there were lots of those type of horses running in it. Crisp would be one, Escargot was a dual Gold Cup winner, anyway, so it was a vintage year. You know, there's a very real chance I could have picked all 5 Red Rums Nationals, and that would be my top 5. He won it 3 times, runner-up 2 in between. The most famous race would be the Crisp one, and that is probably the most exciting national there's been. 77, his 3rd win, would be the sort of heart-tugging one. But I actually think the one which gets least shown is the 74, and I think that's the best one, the best example of what a great horse he was. I think, I don't know what your perception, you're a young puppy, Nick. What do you think of like Red Rum? You just know he's a good horse, but I think there's a perception amongst sort of like people who weren't there around that they almost view him like a cross-country specialist of sort of nowadays. And the reason he sort of won all the nationals, he was just a top-class horse. He only reserved his best for Aintree very late in the day, late in his career, and his first 2 Grand National winning campaigns, he won 6 races in 73-4, he won 6 races in 72-3, and a couple of weeks after he won Aintree, he won the Scottish National in the top weight as well, and running to a Timeform figure, which theoretically at least would have seen him a close second in the Cheltenham Gold Cup, because he gave sort of weight performance which tied him in with the runner-up in the race. So Cheltenham may not have suited, don't get me wrong, but as I say, he was a top-class horse. And without me having to sort of spell out who the horses are in the 74 renewal, you could just watch it without knowing who they were and just realise that's just a really good horse. He took it up at Second Beaches and just grabbed the race by the scruff of the neck. He basically raised the pace from there, and from quite a closely packed field, it just thinned out immediately in those sort of fences from Valentine's down to the 3rd last. And he just sauntered clear under top weight, beating a dual Gold Cup winner in 2nd. And the 4th horse, Spanish Steps, he was placed in a Gold Cup. He was a top class horse in his own right. You know, he was just a top class horse, and as I say, it doesn't get shown as much as the others, but I think this was him in his absolute pomp. It was his best performance round there, and I think it deserves to get shown.
Am I right in thinking as well that he, as a younger horse, won over 5 furlongs, Red Rum?
Yeah, he won it on Grand National Day. I think it was 67 for Avonshire. I don't know if Piggott or Paul Cook. There was a dead heat. He was involved in a dead heat, and I can't remember which one. I think it was Paul Cook was riding him anyway. But yeah, he started out. I mean, there's so much in the story where it was sort of like how he ended up being this horse, because he sort of he'd been around a bit, and it was when he went to Ginger McCain. His form did take off, and it wasn't necessarily a cheap purchase, but he did take off those first 2 years, 72-3 and 73-4. He just kept on improving, and ran in lots of. He's beaten a Short End and a Hennessy. You know, he just was a top class horse. And I think obviously it's famous that he was trained on the beach at Southport, and that probably he was the one horse it probably suited because of his. He was able to keep sound because of it. So he had all that racing, and he'd had training issues before that, and then he basically never missed a trip when the whole time he was training on a beach, which isn't necessarily the normal way it was done in those days.
Yeah, if only Southall was around back then, he'd be a monster, wouldn't he?
I think he's a different kind of sound. I could be wrong, but yeah, he was trained behind a second-hand car dealership. So it was not the norm, but as I say, it suited him, and he was a terrific horse. And as I say in the piece, it cannot be underestimated how important it was in saving the race itself, because basically from the early 60s, Aintree, rather like we've seen recently with Kempton, it was the sort of housing developers had their eyes on it, and it was. Politically, it wasn't great to say, "Oh, we should keep horse racing there," when there was a need for housing in Liverpool, which was still recovering from the Second World War, etc. And basically, it went through it was from early to mid 60s, only until I think 1983, it was finally settled that the race was finally saved. And if you go back and watch the videos of 73 and 74, and you sort of gradually see the sort of stands, there's no one there because it was the people who were running the course at the time were charging an absolute fortune to get in. So these great renewals of the National, there was no one there. I think it was, in fairness to Ladbrokes, they took over and changed all of that. They brought about the 3-day jumps meeting, made it exclusively jumps. It used to be a mixed meeting, the National, up until then.
Bizarre, isn't it?
And turned it around. But absolutely, Red Rum was pivotal in keeping it and sort of raising the interest. You don't get a horse as well known as him. There may be better horses. We're the purists. We like Frankel on the flat or Sprinter Sacra, but the average person in the street doesn't know who they are, whereas everyone knew who Red Rum was. And it's, as I say, it was very, very important in maintaining the race still being there.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for that. And
no problem. There ends the history lesson.
We'll no doubt you'll be on here a couple of times in the next week or so talking about this year's National as well, I think.
Yes, and hopefully trying to pick a winner.
Yeah. We'll see you then.
Cheers. Thanks, Nick.